been the commander assigned to do the research on various less lethal options. Effectively, there are two types of less lethal options that we've been able to identify, and those are either pain-compliant type weaponry or control type weaponry. So when I say pain-compliant, I mean something to the effect of a projected chemical agent such as pepper spray, or I'm talking about a projectile that actually comes out and strikes a person. For instance, we have within the tactical operations within police departments, you have weaponry that in tactical situations where the special officers will have them can have a tremendous takedown force. The challenge is, what type of weapon system can we find out there that meets the needs to mitigate the use of less than lethal that is easily carried upon the person of the officer, so that the officer in the field, your everyday officer, when confronted with violent, combative, resistant individuals, have the necessary tools on their person to overcome that resistance and do it in a fashion that's humane, that minimizes the actual injury that the person may sustain. During the course of those inquiries, we've identified the electronic control weapon system as a weapon system that we do not have, that the vast majority of law enforcement throughout the country has, that has shown an incredible reduction of injuries when it comes to individuals as well as our officers when there is conflict and then that weapon system is used. And even in instances where the weapon system is not used, its mere presence has an impact on the behaviors of those who are resisting the efforts of the law enforcement officers to take them into custody. If you were to do a Google search on taser studies, you're going to find tons and tons of studies that have been conducted. I brought before you today, and I think I have on a number of seats, just the front page of the studies. As each study is pretty voluminous, we couldn't make copies for everyone. So instance, I have a parcel list of studies. This is just one study here. And this study is called Comparing Safety Outcomes in Police Use of Force Cases for Law Enforcement Agencies that have deployed electronic control weapons in a matched comparison group of those that have not. This study was conducted in September of 2009. I'll kind of give you a quick summary of that study. The stated purpose of this project was to produce scientifically valid results that would inform law enforcement executives decisions regarding electronic control weapon use. The goal of the study was to produce a practical information guide that could assist and establish guidelines that assist in the effective design of an electronic control weapon deployment program that support increased safety for officers and citizens. The means was to compare law enforcement agencies with electronic control weapon deployment to a set of matched law enforcement agencies that do not deploy on a variety of safety outcomes. The overall finding was that the electronic control weapons agencies were associated with improved safety outcomes when compared to group or matched non-electronic control weapons on 6 of 9 safety measures. Another study that we used, just to back up real quick, this study was conducted by the Police Executive Research Forum. It's a national forum that conducted this study. The second study, just in terms of the general ones we have, this one is conducted by the National Institution of Justice, and the packets that you have is the second page. And this study is the police use of force, tasers, and other less lethal weapons. This study was conducted in May of 2009. Researchers analyzed some 25,000 use of force incidents from 12 large local law enforcement agencies. The study found that when officers use force of any kind, injury rates to citizens range from 17 to 64%, while officer injury rates range from 10 to 20%. The use of physical force by officers increased the odds of injury to officers and suspect alike. However, the use of pepper spray and electronic control weapons decreased the likelihood of suspect injury by 60 and 70% respectively. Researchers further analyzed the experience of several law enforcement agencies to learn how introducing the electronic control weapons affected injury rates. This approach tracked injuries before and after electronic control introduction and included more than 10,000 use of force incidents. A large drop in injury rates for suspects and officers alike occurred following the electronic control weapon introduction. Researchers noted that good guidelines and training would require the officers to evaluate the age, the size, the sex, apparent physical capabilities, and health concerns of the suspect before using an electronic control weapon. In addition, policies and training should prohibit electronic control use in the presence of flammable liquids or in circumstances where falling would pose unreasonable risk to the suspect, such as in elevated areas or adjacent to traffic. Policies and training should also address the use of electronic control weapons in suspects who are handcuffed or otherwise restrained, and should either prohibit the use outright or limit them to clarify defined aggravated circumstances. You will find in the draft policy that many of these issues that I've just hit in the summary have been addressed by our draft policy. Second to the last statement. This one, once again, is by the National Institution of Justice. This was conducted in May of 2011, and it's a study of deaths following the use of electronic control weapons. The study identified over 12,000 law enforcement agencies that use electronic control weapons nationwide. Approximately 260,000 units have actually been deployed to officers in our country. Although studies have shown a reduction of injuries to both suspects and officers within law enforcement agencies that deploy the electronic control weapons, there have been instances where individuals have died after exposure to an electronic control weapon. To support the study, a medical panel composed of forensic pathologists and medical examiners and other relevant physicians and specialists in cardiology. One of the conclusions of the study was that the risk of death in an electronic control weapon-related use of force incident is less than 0.25%. In 2005, the COPS Office, that's the Community-Oriented Policing Services Office of the U.S. Department of Justice, in conjunction with PERF, established guidelines for the use of electronic control weapons. In 2011, we updated those guidelines. This is the cover of the guidelines for 2011. Some 150 individuals, law enforcement, medical professionals, and academics have made significant changes and improvements to the guidelines for 2005. Those changes from 2005 have been incorporated into the draft policy that we have before us. Lastly, we even take into consideration our own local researchers. This is Dr. Zane, an associate professor of medicine residence at cardiology at the University of San Francisco. He presented a research update on cardiac physiologic and real-world effects of taser use. This was done in August of 2012. And clearly within the study itself, there was some expression of concern about the outcomes, but one of the conclusions was that electronic control weapons can be an effective tool for law enforcement officers. So I present to you that these are the basis of the policy, and much of the discussion that's taking place. It's at your leisure. Just about every one of these studies, actually all of these studies I found online, with the exception of Dr. Sang's that was presented before the police commission. With that said, I'll turn it over to you, Chief.